Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and thank you so much for watching. Today's video is going to be a tutorial to show you how I made this really cute nautical themed cake. So let's get started. I'm starting out with two 8-inch round cakes, which I have divided into 4 layers. And I'm going to brush on some simple syrup to keep the cake moist. And I'm using some chocolate ganache for my filling. Once your cake is stacked up, just make sure the top is nice and level, and then you're going to move on to your crumb coat. My camera did not catch this part unfortunately, but I just added a thin layer of my buttercream on the outside to secure all of the crumbs. Then I just popped that in the fridge for about 25 minutes. Once your cake is set, just take that out and then you're going to add your final layer of buttercream. Add quite a liberal bit for this part, you're going to scrape most of it off anyway. So it's easier to be a bit heavy-handed in this step than to not add enough in the first place. When I've covered my entire cake, I'm going to use my spatula and my bench scraper to smooth the sides and then finally the top. Once you're happy with the way that looks, you can just set that aside. I repeated that process on a 6-inch round cake as well. Moving on to my fondant, I'm going to roll out some white fondant really thin, and that's going to be for my bottom layer. Because I'm already going to be adding layers of blue fondant on top of this, I don't want big thick layers of fondant. So just make this layer nice and thin, and when you apply it to your cake, don't worry if it stretches or kind of creases in some spots because it's all going to be covered. Chill your cake for about 10 minutes before adding your fondant and just drape that over the top. Using your hands and your fondant smoother, just push all the air out and smooth down the sides, fanning out the skirt until you've reached the bottom. Use a pizza cutter or a sharp knife to cut away the excess, and then use your fondant smoother to go around the cake one more time. Again, don't worry about any rips or creases in the fondant because this will be covered. For my second tier, I'm rolling out my fondant to be roughly 1/8 of an inch thick, and I will take more care when I'm putting the fondant on this cake because there will be no secrets. If there's any tears or creases, they will not be hidden. So just take your time with this step. This cake is quite heavy, so I'm going to use some wooden dowels in the bottom, and I'm just inserting those evenly throughout the bottom tier and then marking that off with an edible food marker and cutting it so that it will be flush with the cake. I've added a thin layer of buttercream to cover my dowels, and that's also going to act as an adhesive for my top tier, which I'm just popping on using a cake holder. Once I've got that on there, I'm just going to center it and then let it sit for a couple minutes so the buttercream has time to kind of stiffen up a bit so my cake doesn't wiggle around while I try to decorate it. Next, I'm going to start on my cute little sailboat topper, And for this step, I'm just going to roll out some red fondant. I didn't have a circle cutter on hand that was as big as I wanted, so I just made a little template for myself. So you're just going to cut that circle out, and then you're going to cut it exactly in half. I've got a cake pop stick which I'm using as the support for my topper, and once I brushed on some water, I'm going to put that into the center of one of my halves and just make sure there's enough room at the bottom for that to stick into your cake, and then add the other half on top of that. Just kind of give it a little smooth down and make sure it sticks together, and then set that aside to dry. I've dyed my fondant a dark blue, a medium blue, and a light blue shade, and I'm just going to let those sit for about 10 minutes. I like to do that after I dye my fondant, especially a dark color, just so that they're not too soft when I try to work with them. And in the meantime, I'm going to start making the rope for the border on my top tier, and to do that, I'm rolling out 2 thin ropes of fondant, and I'm just going to kind of twist them together until I get the look I want, and I'm going to add that to the bottom of my top tier. Once my fondant has set up, I'm going to roll out each shade, and using my X-Acto knife, I'm going to cut out some strips, and then on the top of each strip, I'm going to make like a wavy pattern. I'm going to attach that to my cake. I've brushed the entire cake with some water, not so that it's sopping wet, just so that it's tacky. And then I'm going to add 2 layers of each color, and then just making sure I'm covering up all the seams as best I can. Make sure that you're adding those colors from lightest to darkest so you have a nice little ombre effect, and then you can just kind of flare out the tips of each section just so it has a little more texture, not so that each piece is just flat against the cake. Once I added all my ruffles, I put my cake on top of a larger cake board that I covered with the same colored fondant as the darkest blue, just so it all kind of looked cohesive. You don't have to do that step, of course, if you don't want to. For my life preserver, I'm rolling out some fondant a little on the thicker side, and then using some saran wrap, I'm covering that really tightly so that there's no creases, so that when I press down with my circle cutter, it kind of gives it a bubble effect versus just like a flat piece of fondant. And then cover that again and use a smaller circle cutter, I'm using a piping tip in this case, and press right down in the center. And then you're gonna have your little inner tube. Next, I'm going to start finishing off my sailboat, and I do apologize for the weird yellow lighting in this. It was about 3 in the morning here, and all the natural sunlight was gone. I've rolled out some dark blue fondant into a triangle shape, and I've left a little bit of excess on one side of my cake pop stick so that I can fold that fondant over, and that's how my sail is going to attach to my sailboat. Just smooth the side out so it's generally straight, and then set that aside so that it can stiffen up a bit. I cut out some light blue fondant in another triangle shape, and then I placed that directly on top of my cake pop stick. You could let the light blue triangle dry completely before you add it so it remains straight and doesn't kind of crease down against the counter, but I liked the way that looked. I thought it looked a little more natural and flowy. So once that's on there, you can just set that whole thing aside to dry. I decided to add an anchor onto my cake, so I rolled out some gray fondant, and then using a template that I will link below, I cut that out with my X-Acto knife and then used the end of a piping tip for the little circle thing at the top. To finish off my life preserver, I cut out some long strips of red fondant and then just placed a couple strips evenly along the entire circle. I wanted to give my anchor a little more dimension as well, so I brushed on some shortening to the entire surface, and then using a paintbrush, I just packed on a little bit of some silver luster dust. You can really do any design you want on your sailboat. I just looked at a couple pictures and did what I thought looked best just to match the colors in the cake. So I added some red stripes and then a red star, and I also added some portholes using a piping tip. Make sure your sailboat is completely dry before you add it to your cake so your sails don't break off, and then you can just pop that right into the center. And you can see I added a ball of that dark blue fondant to the top, and I also rolled out some teardrop shapes with the light blue, and just using pieces of spaghetti, I pushed those in to kind of look like water splashes coming up. I used some water to adhere my life preserver and my anchor to my top tier, and then to finish off the whole cake, I added a little bit of non-toxic glue to the rim of my bottom cake board, and then just used some black ribbon to finish it off and hide any of the silver bits. And then you're done. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for new videos every week.